if you come off the pill and they test your ovarian reserve parameters, so like your AMH, anti-Müllerian hormone, antral follicle count, as well as the ovarian volume, what you find is women who are on the pill, all of those numbers are really low because the ovaries are dormant. And so the ovarian volume is smaller because your ovaries kind of shrink a little bit. Be aware that the mucus is a sign of fertility. And the reason is because the sperm can survive in there for up to 5 days. And that's the design. The design is to have the mucus to come leading up to ovulation so the sperm can just hang out in there. In your cervix, it's like a hotel for the sperm.
Did you know that your menstrual cycle can reveal as much about your health as your blood pressure or maybe even your heart rate? In this episode, I welcome Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, who is a certified fertility awareness educator and the best-selling author of The Fifth Vital Sign. And she is going to shatter misconceptions and uncovers why your cycle is actually your ultimate health indicator. Here's the kicker. Your cervical mucus can predict fertility with up to 98% accuracy, and over 80% of women are actually deficient in key nutrients like magnesium and iron, essential for hormone health. Lisa also reveals how common practices like intermittent fasting and intense workouts could be sabotaging your cycle without you even realizing it. So whether you're trying to conceive, optimize your hormone health, or finally understand your body's natural rhythms, Lisa's expertise will leave you with empowered and actionable steps. It's time for confession. Lisa, welcome to her Health Confessions. I can't wait to dive into your area of expertise. But as always, we kick off the episode with our guest's health confession. So with that being said, Lisa, what is your health confession?
You told me that would be the first question, and I'm trying to think of what it would be. I've spent a lot of years cleaning things up, like I used to, when I was in high school, I would joke that candy was a food group. I used to eat gummy candies all the time and eat all those ramen noodles, and I didn't have enough protein, but I didn't realize that was the issue. So I was just hungry all the time, and I was always snacking, and I used to have oatmeal for breakfast, and then I'd be hungry half an hour later. And so over the years, I've certainly changed a lot of things. So these days, overall, it's a lot better. I still have a bit of a sweet tooth, which I don't, in the grand scheme of things these days, the overall diet is pretty good. I get lots of protein, you know what I mean? I eat my meals and all of that. I would say the things that are most challenging for me health-wise, I'm also a recovering night owl. And so for many, many years, I would always go to bed late. And that's something I've been working on for years. And so nowadays, my bedtime is around 10 o'clock, which is fantastic. But sometimes if it's really stressful, I'll stay up a little bit later. So I would say my weaknesses would be the bedtime and the occasional sweet stuff.
How late are we talking?
I mean, these days it's like 11, 30, that's kind of when it's too late. Before, when I was stressed, that's how I'd cope. So I might stay up till 1:30 and still have to get up in the morning. So like I said, I've been working on these things. It's what I do day and night. It's what I talk about with my clients. So I'm in it as well. But certainly these days, the late air quotes is more like 11:30, which is a huge improvement. And it's few and far in between. Whereas before it was a more consistent thing.
And do you still have the gummy addiction?
No, we are past that. I'm 42 now, turning 42 next month. So, that was a good, 25 years ago when I was a teenager and I was all the time. But like I said, one of the key pieces of this that I discovered, because I've had many clients who share the same scenario, maybe not gummies specifically, but, do food diary, and there's lots of treats and things. So the key thing for me was that I was hungry. I mean, you just don't realize it when you're addicted to sweets. So if anyone's listening and you're addicted to sweets and every night you got to have this candy or whatever, it could be that you're not getting enough sleep, because it does trigger that craving specifically for carbohydrates. And there's research showing that when you don't get enough sleep, you eat more. So that's a thing. So that's one thing to consider. And the other thing is that if you're not getting enough, a balanced overall macronutrient scenario, if your breakfasts are devoid of protein, your lunch is barely having any, and dinner is kind of sparse, then you are hungry. And that is why you're eating all those sweets. So for me, a big part of it was shifting my diet to making sure that I was having these balanced meals. It changed everything. All of a sudden, I wasn't hungry 30 minutes later from breakfast. I was able to just live my life as an adult human being. I just don't have time to constantly be starving. It just gets irritating. I know it's for health reasons as well, but honestly, from a practical standpoint, it's just no way to live, to always be like snacking and snacking because you're always hungry, hangry. So that was huge. And I would say that nowadays it's more like you have your meals and then you just have the little treat. Like for me, I just have the little treat, if I want it, but I don't have it all the time. And I certainly don't binge on gummy candies anymore, um, because I'm generally proteined.
Now, you are the author of an incredible book called The Fifth Vital Sign. So, for those who don't know or are not familiar with the book, what does it cover and what drove you to write the book?
Oh, great question. Well, so that was my very first book. And honestly, that book came out of the work that I was doing. So I've been teaching, women to chart their menstrual cycles using the fertility awareness method for the better part of the last 2 decades. And when I started my podcast and started sharing about it, women would learn these things, that you're not fertile every day, that you can track your cycle, that you can understand the small window of fertility in your cycle. And also, I think most importantly, that your cycle is connected to health, so that it's not your menstrual cycle isn't just related to your ability to have children, which is important, but it's also a sign of health. And when you understand that, you can learn about the normal parameters of the cycle, how long it's supposed to be, what your period's supposed to be like, when you're supposed to see your cervical fluid, when you're not, how long the post ovulatory phase of the menstrual cycle is supposed to be. And then if your cycle is outside of those parameters, you can learn a lot about what's going on health-wise, because women would learn about this information, later in life and be really upset. So there'd be this kind of excitement to learn how your body works. Obviously, it's fascinating, but there would also be this anger, this like resentment, like, what the heck is going on? How could I be 25, 36, 42, whatever, and I haven't ever learned about this? How did I not know how my body worked? So that's why I wrote the book. And in that book, I cover, of course, the concept, which I'm arguing the main concept, that your body, that your reproductive system, your menstrual cycle is a sign of health. And I find that some of the comments that I get are even women who are in the health field, who, like even doctors and, naturopaths and people who are in the health field, if they didn't learn about this information, they're kind of shocked, because you fully went through like a degree program, but you didn't learn about the nuances of your menstrual cycle. That's a whole topic that, again, medical textbooks just don't talk about, the cervical crypts and the different types of mucus and all that kind of stuff. So people are kind of surprised, right, by that information. They don't expect to learn that much. I also talk about fertility awareness charting, just how to do it for birth control, and how to optimize your cycles for conception. I go into the birth control pill, which is particularly upsetting for a lot of people, because I go into the science of it. And there's a lot of research. The pill has been on the market for over 60 years. It came in 1960. And unlike some of the newer medications that we use today that we might have some concerns about, I mean, the pill has been out for long enough that there's just so much research. We know about so many side effects, and the list of side effects is actually pretty astounding, from depression, low libido, anxiety, all the way to gallbladder. Because I've spoken to a couple women who had their gallbladders act up, and they lost their gallbladders. Like, there's immune issues associated with all these things that you wouldn't necessarily think of that are associated with it. So some, I think most women are thankful to learn about it, and some get mad because they feel like I'm bashing the pill, but it's like, no, I'm not. I'm just reading the research and reporting on it, Don't shoot the messenger.
What made you want to go down the path of being a fertility educator and with clients? Like, was it something that you had personally experienced yourself, or was it something you just always had an interest in?
Well, so in my case, I mean, I discovered fertility awareness really early on. I was really fortunate to discover this when I was about 18 years old. So, when I first had my periods were very heavy, they were painful, and they were hard to deal with. I mean, it was just a lot. And so at that time, girls talked. It wasn't like it is now. There was no internet for me to look at all this information. So I just went to my doctor and asked to be put on the pill, because that's what you did. And the doctor, before I even finished my sentence, he was writing the prescriptions. I went on the pill. And so I just had this personal experience of, I wasn't on the pill for birth control. I was on it because my periods were harder to deal with. And then when I went on it, my pill periods, which are not real periods, withdrawal bleeds, were lighter, easier to deal with, not as much pain. And I know everyone does not have that experience, but that was my experience. And so I thought to myself, I'm healed. We're good. We're good to go. So I every now and then I'd periodically, come off this pill, but my actual periods would come back and they would be just the same as they were before or worse. So I didn't have the language to talk about it at the time, but I did know that my actual period was different to whatever was going on in the pill, and the pill that wasn't actually fixing me. So I had this experience very early on. And I also had personal experiences, like my mom, she had fibroids, and I discovered that one of like her eldest sister, one of my aunts also had them. She had them removed, and when she had the surgery, my aunt came to stay with us, and I was privy to all these adult conversations about this issue. And I saw my mom; she would be laying on the couch when she would have her period, and the blood would just be running down her leg, like she had to lay on a mat, like it was a whole thing. And her belly was really distended. She looked like she was 3 months pregnant. And this is not uncommon in the Black community whatsoever. And so, I thought to myself that I didn't have any information, but I thought to myself as a teenager that I wanted to figure out what was going on with my cycles. I didn't feel like they should be like that because my friends didn't talk about that kind of stuff. They talk about all this pain and all this bleeding and stuff. So I had a sense that it wasn't normal, even though I was having it. Like my periods were just super painful. When I would have them, I'd be doubled over on the floor. And at the time, it's really graphic, but hey, we're talking about it. So it felt like someone was reaching at my butt and squeezing as hard as they could, and I remember thinking to myself that labor, this must be like labor. And when I finally had kids 10 years later or 12 years later or whatever it is, I I was in labor with my eldest son for like a day, like a whole like 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 p.m. before I realized I was in labor, because I was like, this can't be labor. My periods hurt more than this. So the labor eventually gets worse than the period pain, but like this is what I'm saying. It's like totally ridiculous. So that was my experience. And when I discovered fertility awareness charting, I was actually looking for just an alternative. When I needed birth control, I decided I was going to come off the pill because I was also a little bit older. I was in university, so I was out of the house, and I wanted to figure this out. So I didn't have any information, but I was like, okay, I'm going to come off the pill. I'm going to try to deal with these periods and try to see what I can do to make them better. My cycles were also on the longer end, so I kind of had this desire to like make that, I want to figure this out. I don't want to have a hysterectomy. I don't want to have these giant fibroids. Like, I don't want to have the same fate as what I'm seeing in my family. And so I discovered fertility awareness. And at that time, my first foray into it was Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Weschler. And so I started charting. And then very soon after that, there was a group of women on my university campus who were teaching fertility awareness. And I started going. And then I quickly became an organizer. And then a group of us took a class together, and to teach women. So we did that class, and then we were just doing like in the coffee shop, like grassroots. No one was making any money. We were doing donation, right? That kind of thing. So I never thought it could be an actual career, because this was like in the early 2000s. This was before Facebook and Instagram and all these things. There was just none of that. There were no podcasts. Like, it wasn't a thing. And so I didn't think that it could be a career, but I was always very interested in it. I felt like it had made a big difference in my life. I didn't find all the answers in my early 20s to all of my period problems. I'll say that took a little bit longer. So I still struggled with painful periods for quite some time. And this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book as well, and why Lily and I got together to write our recent book, Real Food for Fertility, because although I had learned about the charting piece of it early on, the actual support your menstrual cycle, improve hormone health piece didn't come until later on. And so the work that I do hopefully bridges that gap and brings those things together, so that you don't just get to learn about the charting piece, which is super interesting and helpful, but so many women have issues with their periods that we also need to have some support for how to improve those issues.
Why is our age often linked to fertility or infertility? What's happening in a woman's body as she ages that would affect her ability to conceive?
It's such a great question, because we're taught in our culture that we can get pregnant at any day of the cycle. And most of us live our young adult lives with this fear of pregnancy, which isn't unfounded because, I mean, you can't get pregnant every day of your cycle, but, statistically speaking, we have higher fertility in our younger years. So part of that is just how we are, like how our bodies are designed. When we're younger, we just have better egg quality. So it's just that kind of vibrant aspect of us that is directly attributed to that youthfulness. It doesn't mean that, though, that younger women don't ever have fertility issues, because fertility issues are on the rise across the board. But that's a big piece of it. So when we look at what the research has to say about age, there is a lot of research that shows that age is one of the most, if not the most important factors in terms of a woman's ability to conceive. The research can be really terrifying and can be very one-sided and can make it seem like age is like the only factor. But this is something that even in Real Food for Fertility, we have an egg quality chapter. We have a section on aging. And that was something that Lily and I went back and forth on a lot, because we wanted to have this delicate balance where we're telling you about the effects of age so that you understand them, because we don't want to sugarcoat the reality of the situation. But we also don't want to discourage women, because age is not the only factor, but it is an important factor. So if you think about the female reproductive life cycle, when we start menstruating at menarche, it's an average age of about 13 years old. There's an end date to this. We all know this, but we have to think about what that means. So the average age of menopause is about 51 years old. And so we have a very defined reproductive window and it does not go on forever. And as we approach the end of that, so the final 10 years, that 10 years represents a period where our bodies are naturally moving towards the end. And so especially during that time, that's when we start to see increases in the, you could say decreases in the egg quality. That's when we start to see an increased risk of chromosomal issues, an increased susceptibility to oxidative stress. And it's not just women that experience this. I mean, the difference between the male and the female reproductive cycle is that in the male reproductive cycle, they do continue to produce sperm their whole lives. So from puberty onwards, men make sperm. So, even, elderly men are still making sperm. But the part that we don't talk about is, just like women, as men get older, they are also more susceptible to oxidative stress and the effects of aging. And so there's some really interesting research that kind of shows how age can affect fertility. When we're looking at the success rates, for example, of IVF, when you have a woman, so that the egg, when you have an egg from a woman who is in her 40s, it's much less likely to result in a live birth than if you have an egg from a woman in her 20s or 30s. So there's this direct correlation to the egg itself and its ability to even to overcome some of the issues related to sperm quality. So I think one of the most interesting pieces of research that I was reading around egg quality is related to the egg's ability to actually repair some of the sperm DNA damage. So the human sperm is known to be just not great. It's just not compared, like in the animal kingdom, like when they look at the quality of sperm, because the average man today, has a sperm concentration of like 50 million sperm. And when we look at the actual sperm, what is considered optimal? So we shared some research from, the numbers of the sperm quality that would be optimal. The morphology is a measure of like how the sperm actually looks. So when you think of what a sperm would look like, you think of like a round head and a tail. But for the optimal scenario, about 12 to 15% of the partner's sperm, the male sperm, would be normal looking, normal morphology. And that would mean like 85 to like 87 or 88% would actually have morphological issues, like whether it's the tail is gone or the head is smushed or whatever. And so this is like the optimal human sperm. And according to the World Health Organization, normal is 4% morphology, meaning 4 out of every 100 sperm look normal and 96 look kind of weird. So if we go back to the egg quality conversation, human sperm is notoriously just not at the top. And especially as men get older as well, they're more susceptible to this oxidative damage, which can damage the DNA. And that's, of course, what we need to be intact in order to have a healthy human being. So what the research shows us is that, especially for young women, great egg quality, we've got, these young, vibrant, youthful eggs that are less susceptible to oxidative stress. They have a greater capacity to actually repair some of the damaged sperm DNA, which could be one of the reasons why younger women may be able to conceive more easily and have higher fertility. And as we get older, our eggs, although pregnancy is still possible, they seem to lose some of that capacity to even overcome some of the male issues. So that's something that's really interesting. That's kind of going into the weeds a little bit. But I think the good news and the most important aspect is that first and foremost, we need to be aware of how age impacts fertility. We have to really think about the fact that there is a end date. Our society these days, as women, we're encouraged to, and this is controversial to say, but we're encouraged to wait. We're encouraged to wait. We're encouraged to, go to school and to get our degrees and to get a good job. And this means that, and then find the perfect partner, right? And so this means that we're not often, especially these days, thinking even about pregnancy until 30s and mid 30s. And somehow the plan has been switched so that we think we have this time at the end. So if you start having kids in your mid 30s and you want 4, you might be able to pull that off, but you might not, because it's a little bit different of a game. So the conversation, although kind of difficult, kind of controversial, we need to really be thinking about that. So for example, if you are a young woman, if you're in your late teens, we should be having those conversations about, what do you want in your life? We have all these conversations about what kind of career do you want, and we want to plan all this stuff. But why aren't we having conversations to plan our families? Do you want to get married? How many kids do you want? It's not really something, in my opinion, that we should be waiting to think about until we're 35. Because then you're really on a bit of a time crunch, because we do have an end date. Now, everyone isn't the same, and plenty of women are able to conceive into their late 30s and early 40s, but many are not. And we're not necessarily talking about, not easily, I guess you could say. And I think we should be talking about that more.
What would you say to the women that are 35 and older who are at a stage where as you said, the plan might not have exactly gone the way it was supposed to, or there wasn't actually a plan in the first place? What are the types of things that they could be doing, even if it's natural mechanisms, to potentially improve their chances of conceiving?
I think one of the first things is to start really reconsidering your type of birth control. So if you are, I would even say 30 and older and you want children, I would say that it's time to reconsider your birth control. So if you're on hormonal contraceptives of any kind, so whether it's the pill, the patch, the ring, the shot is the worst one. So just if you're on the shot, run from that immediately. The implant. So I would say you really should be reconsidering that option. And it's hard, because I also know that you, like all of us, were brainwashed into thinking that we could get pregnant all the time. So I find the younger generation is even more terrified of pregnancy, just terrified, just to the point. When I was in high school, it was during the HIV AIDS era or whatever. So they went on and on and on about condoms. So I actually felt very confident that condoms were an effective form of birth control. Now, I understand that. I'm just sharing. I'm not saying everyone should use condoms. Like, people are going to make their own decisions, and a lot of people don't like condoms. That's not my point. My point was that I had just different experience of not thinking that the only option was hormonal. And I find the younger generation is just totally, and I'm going to use the word brainwashed, into thinking that if you're not also on a hormonal option, that it's just not even going to work. And I think that that is something that is really unfortunate. So if you're in that age group, I would say the reason that I'm saying that you should reconsider your type of birth control is because when we look at the actual research, we know that when you come off hormonal birth control, there is a temporary period of subfertility. So what hormonal birth control does, most of the types of hormonal birth control suppress ovulation, and also thin the uterine lining and prevent you from making fertile quality cervical mucus. And those are kind of the three main issues or the three main, I guess you could say, modes of action that cause it to be effective. So if you're on, let's say, the combined pill, then it's stopping your ovulation, and so this is what's going on. And many women are on that for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, some even 20 years. And if you think about this logically, just logically, like if you had a car and you just like had it in the garage and it wasn't working and there was no oil and there was no gas, like, do you think that you're just going to turn it on 20 years later and it's just going to run perfectly? What we see in the research is that it takes a little bit of time. So it takes a little bit of time. I think there's a couple, there's one kind of stream of research that looks at what happens to women when they're on the pill. And there was this one study where they had these women that were going for fertility preservation. And so fertility preservation is when you freeze your eggs. And so these women were on the pill, and they, if you come off the pill and they test your ovarian reserve parameters, so like your AMH, anti-Müllerian hormone, antral follicle count, as well as the ovarian volume, what you find is women who are on the pill, all of those numbers are really low because the ovaries are dormant. And so the ovarian volume is smaller because your ovaries kind of shrink a little bit. The AMH is super, super low, and the antral follicle count is super, super low. And so what happens is if these women were to just come off the pill and right away try to do this procedure to give them a shot, try to take some eggs and then whatever, freeze them, then what happens is they just don't get a lot of eggs because the AMH is super low. But what they found is that if you wait 6 months or so, those parameters normalize a little bit, and the yield is a lot better if they're doing that. So in the research paper, the researchers concluded that it would be a good idea for women who are going for fertility preservation to wait at least 6 months, in between the pill to get the egg retrieval. Yet that is not the advice for women who are trying to conceive naturally. Typically, we're told that it's completely fine. So that's one of the ways that we know. There's different ways in the research that show us that there's this temporary period of subfertility. So that's obviously one of them. It takes time for the ovaries themselves to rebound, for the ovarian reserve parameters to normalize, and for your hormones to normalize as well, which you can see when you're tracking your menstrual cycle, especially if you're tracking it in a detailed way. It takes time for the mucus to return, for the cycle to normalize overall length, all of those factors, the luteal phase to be normal, and even sometimes like for the hormones to balance out and for women to feel normal again. So that's something, there's research showing that when women come off the pill, obviously pregnancy is possible, and obviously some women get pregnant even on the pill or, right after they come off the pill. So obviously it's not to say that it's impossible or it doesn't happen, because we know that it does. But there was another study that looked at women who were using condoms compared to women who were using the pill versus the IUD versus, the implant. So they were comparing, and the shot, they were comparing a number of different options. And what the researchers found was that women who came off the pill took about twice as long to conceive. So, on average about 8 months versus 4 months for the women who are using condoms. So all this is to say, this is like a super long way of saying it, but I feel like it's not useful for women just to hear just do this. I think it's helpful to hear where the information comes from in more specific scientific way, because we're never talked to like this. But again, it's not me, it's what the research says. So back to your question, which is like, what is the advice? Like, first of all, really consider your type of birth control. If you're using a hormonal method, start to just do some research on non-hormonal methods, see what you can come up with, see if you're comfortable trying something different. Because if you want to have children at some point, it is a good idea to come off that birth control an absolute minimum of 6 months ahead of time. I would say 6 to 12 a year is good as a minimum measure. I would say if you're able to do that, that would be fantastic. If you were on the pill though, because you had issues, like you had super painful periods, or you had terrible acne or really bad PMS, or, irregular cycles, or you didn't even have cycles and that's why you're put on it, then I would recommend 18 months to 2 years if possible, if that's a possibility for you. And that sounds crazy. People are like, that's such a long time. But if you honestly if you didn't know when your periods were coming, when you come off the pill, it's much more likely that you're going to still have that problem because the pill didn't fix it. If you had these raging PMS, hormonal issues, whatever you had going into it, it's not likely that you're going to come off the pill and it's all gone. So if you did have some sort of issue and that's why you were on the pill, you really should think about that. You should think about coming off of it ahead of time. Because what happens is that, I've worked with women in both scenarios. I've worked with women who come off the birth control pill and they want to get pregnant, but like not right now. They came off early. They're interested in charting. They want to learn about their bodies. They want to, take a little bit of time before they conceive to focus on nutrition and their cycles and their hormones and all that. And then there's the women who come off the pill, immediately want to get pregnant. So in those scenarios, in both scenario A and B, the menstrual cycle takes time to normalize. Whether you planned for it, whether you wanted that, doesn't matter. The menstrual cycle takes time to normalize. So for these women who are trying to conceive, like they're also actively having sex and trying to conceive when their cycles are not necessarily regular yet. Maybe it takes them a while to ovulate. I just explained all these other things that could be going on in the background. The ovarian reserve parameters are still normalizing, et cetera, et cetera. So for both women, if both of them got pregnant, so for example, if the woman who's trying to get pregnant, if it takes her 8 months, it's like one of the most stressful 8 months of her entire life. But that would actually be within the normal range. But for the woman who came off and she's not actually trying for the first year, right? She's not on the pill anymore. Her cycle's doing its thing. It's normalizing. She's still seeing the same cycle issues like long cycles or short luteal phases or, low mucus or whatever, but she's not actively trying. So it's not as stressful of a time for her. So that's a big part of my answer, but it's not the only part of my answer. So I just want to also add that the other thing that you would want to do in addition to that, because you could tell that was my soapbox, like about the pill, but the other part that's really important is to focus on your nutrition. So again, this is one of the reasons why Lily and I teamed up to write this book, because in order to kind of overcome some of those potential issues related to aging, and in order to put yourself in the best possible position, you would really want to focus on replenishing your nutrients. You really want to focus on doing things that are going to support optimal egg and sperm quality, so your partner doesn't get off the hook at all. So when you're older, it's even more important for your partner to be on point with his nutrition, that have the highest, micronutrient density, the specific nutrients that we want to make sure to incorporate to ensure that we have optimal egg and sperm quality. And also some of the strategies to overcome some of that oxidative stress that is more common as we get older. And so, part of it is focusing on those macronutrients. So I think for a lot of us in this day and age, we just want just give me the supplement list. You know what I mean? Like, just tell me what nutrients. But it's really essential for us to have an optimal foundation. So in the book, I think we do a good job of showing how, getting sufficient protein, fat, and carbohydrates in balance is essential. It's the foundation and building block of our hormonal cycle. If you're not getting enough protein, if you're not getting enough fat, you just are not giving yourself the building blocks. So, for example, protein is essential for optimal kind of thermogenesis in the body. So to have your body at the right temperature to maintain your metabolism. Having healthy animal fats is a source of cholesterol, and all of our steroid hormones are made from cholesterol. So whether we're talking about estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, we need the animal fat as a foundation of that. And so I know a lot of women struggle with that. A lot of women unintentionally undereat protein. We're just not eating it. It's just that. And because I see the food diaries, I've worked with, over 1,000 women at this point, I see it. And a lot of us are working out, and especially as we get into our mid-30s, that's when we start to notice the differences between our 20s, and maybe it's easier to put on some weight. So then there's a lot of women who are kind of changing their diet in ways that are not optimal, skipping breakfast and all these different things that end up kind of causing cycle fluctuations and challenges and not optimal for egg quality. So we really focus on, we need to get those macros in a good balance. And then we need to focus on those key nutrients that support egg and sperm quality. And when you do those things, you see the benefits in your cycle and your hormone health as well. So it all comes together. I mean, we're arguing that a healthy menstrual cycle sets the stage for optimal fertility. And the great thing about tracking your cycle is you can actually see when you're moving in the right direction. So that's a huge part of my work. And so I guess the good news in all of this is, I think it's so important for us to be aware of the issues related to age and just how we need to be paying attention to these things. If you're 35 and older, though, it's not necessarily bad news. It just means that you just need more information, and you need to be aware that as you get older, we are more susceptible to this like when you're reading the research about egg quality, all it's oxidative stress, oxidative damage, and how it can damage the DNA and all of these things. So then what do you need to do? Well, you need to consume foods that are going to protect the eggs against the oxidative damage. And there's a lot of different nutrients that you need to make sure to focus on. And the same nutrients that support egg quality support sperm quality. So it's a lot of the same kind of things. Like we talk about eating organ meats, we talk about eating fish and seafood for the omega-3 fatty acids, for the zinc and the B vitamins. We talk about even the importance of consuming green leafy vegetables for all the antioxidant properties. There was a lot in the research about citrus fruits for males, because of some of those key nutrients. And what I'll mention too is in the organ meats, like liver, for example, liver is high in vitamin A, retinol, so not the same vitamin A that you get in carrots, which is essential for reproduction. Liver and organ meats are also high in coenzyme Q10, which is one of the nutrients that's talked about most for egg quality, which I'm not saying like there are plenty of times supplementation is appropriate, but I'm just giving an example of like one of the food sources of that. So there's a lot more to be said for those things, but those two pieces I would focus on. And in terms of the nutritional plan, a good idea is to start focusing on the nutrition similarly, at least 6 months, 6 to 12 months before you're planning to conceive, to just start adding in some of those foods that are going to really support fertility.
Are there like a top 3 that you would pick if you could only pick, those specific foods that you could recommend?
Liver would be the top that I would recommend easily. Fish and seafood would probably be a close second. There's a lot of other foods that would come after that. I mean, if you're able to tolerate dairy, adding in full fat dairy, there's a lot of good research showing that women who incorporate full fat dairy have higher rates of ovulatory fertility. There was a really interesting study. I think the researchers didn't know what to do with that data. It's almost like this inconvenient truth for them that the women who ate the high fat dairy had the lowest rates of ovulatory infertility. So, I mean, there's a lot more that you could do, but I'm always talking about liver. One thing to consider is that vitamins are kind of a new phenomenon, within the last 200 years. Before that, there were no companies that made these pills. So what did people do? What did these traditional cultures eat? How did they manage to have healthy babies when there was no vitamins, when there was no whole foods, when there was no, right? What did they do? And so they ate very specific aspects of those animals. There was a lot of cultures that relied heavily on the kind of raw milk products, and not just the milk in the general sense. They would plan weddings based on the seasons, because during the rainy season, the grass would be growing fast. The cows would be eating that rapidly growing grass. The milk itself would have a higher nutrient density. The butter would be more yellow, that kind of thing. And so they would plan weddings around marriages around the seasons, so that these individuals would be kind of having children when the nutrient situation was highest. And they knew to eat the liver and the different organs, whether it be the heart or the kidneys, because of their higher concentration of, maybe it's higher concentration of selenium, higher concentration of zinc. I mean, when you look at the composition of liver itself, so in the fifth vital sign, I have this table that shows you, it compares liver to whether it's like green leafy vegetables or chicken or something like that. I mean, it's an incredible source of folate. It's an incredible source of choline, vitamin A, vitamin B12, vitamin B6, all the Bs, all the B vitamins, iron. And especially for women who are trying to conceive, there was a study that I quoted in the fifth vital sign showing that only about 20% of women going into pregnancy had sufficient iron stores. I mean, it's fascinating. And I know that's a whole story. A lot of women get concerned about the liver because of the vitamin A, but we're talking about preconception nutrition here. In Lily's book, Real Food for Pregnancy, she talks a lot about how to incorporate liver safely during pregnancy, because it's essential to have sufficient iron, sufficient B vitamins. And there's no time in your life as a woman, there's no time where you're going to require as much nutrition as when you're making another human. So I often share what I call the bank account analogy, which is that when you are pregnant or breastfeeding, and I have a 2-year-old who's still breastfeeding, so I'm still in it, by the way. But when you are pregnant or breastfeeding, you can think about it. It's a time of withdrawals. You're quite literally making a human being with your body. And where do those nutrients come from? So with this information, Lily and I are both mothers. She has 2 children, I have 3. And so we're coming at this as well, having experienced pregnancy and birth several times and the postpartum several times. So it's not just about getting pregnant. It's about having healthy children and for you to be healthy as a mom after the children are born, because it's extremely depleting, very hard on the body to literally build babies with your body. Like, what did you do last night? Well, I grew a baby. What did you do? Right. I made milk for my baby, while I was sleeping, kind of thing. And we just have to talk more about the nutrient requirement of these activities. So when you are able to really plan ahead a little bit, you put yourself ahead as well, because when that baby comes, even if you were nutrient replete, even if you did have good iron levels and good B vitamin stores, which most women just don't postpartum, and no one's checking for them. No one's doing nutrient panels on postpartum women to see how they're doing. But even if you did have really optimal nutrient stores, you would still be tired because you have this baby that's, not sleeping and doing its thing and all of that. It's a lot of effort. So I also want moms to be healthy and happy and to put yourself in the best possible situation, not just to get pregnant, but to take care of this child. And many of us, if we're talking about the 35 and older with no plan, many of us, then it's not just the one child you want to have. You want to have 2 or 3. And often that means we have to have them back to back. So what's the plan nutrition wise? Because when you try to do that, you really can just deplete your body just so rapidly when you weren't even replete for baby 1. And now you're already thinking about baby 2 and there's no nutritional plan in between. It's essential to be thinking about these things.
What about the women who have no idea what cervical mucus is and why it's important?
Fortunately, that's easy to figure out. That's easy to figure out. So if you're not on contraceptives and you're cycling, you just start paying attention. So you can, when you go to the bathroom, you can start wiping yourself. You can pay attention to your underwear. You can even pay attention on those days that you feel a little wet down there, like you kind of think something's going on. So with cervical fluid, it can look like clear, stretchy, raw egg white type that you can stretch between your fingers if you were to pick it up. It can look like creamy white hand lotion. And when you're looking at your menstrual cycle, if I take you through the menstrual cycle, the first day of your cycle is the first day of your period. And then when you get into that fertile window leading up to ovulation, that's when in a healthy cycle you would typically see that fertile quality cervical fluid. And then once you ovulate, your progesterone sharply rises, and that in a healthy cycle tends to either completely just shut down that mucus production or significantly reduce the amount that you are producing. So what that means is that if you're trying to get pregnant, just you need to understand that the days that you see mucus leading up to ovulation, those are the best days. It's not day 14, because everyone does not always ovulate on day 14. It's not always the same day of the cycle. So I encourage women to try to get out of the rhythm method thinking it's hard. I know, because our whole lives we've been told all this stuff in the pills 28 days because they wanted to mimic what the average cycle or whatever. But if you were to take nothing else from this podcast, but, start checking for your mucus. And when you see the clear, stretchy mucus leading up to ovulation, have sex. I don't care if it's on day 6. I don't care if it's on day 12. I don't care if it's on day 18. When you see the clear, stretchy mucus, that's when you have sex. So get the day 14 stuff out of your head. It's an average. It's not when you are necessarily going to ovulate. And that would be, yeah. And if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, well, take the opposite advice. First of all, you shouldn't be having unprotected sex if you're trying to avoid pregnancy if you haven't fully learned the method. So that's not a good idea. But just be aware that the mucus is a sign of fertility. And the reason is because the sperm can survive in there for up to 5 days. And that's the design. The design is to have the mucus to come leading up to ovulation so the sperm can just hang out in there. In your cervix, which is the base of the uterus, which is where the baby comes through and, the opening and everything. In the cervix are these cervical crypts. I mentioned them earlier. It's literally little folds inside your cervix. It's like a hotel for the sperm. They hang out there. It's a thing. They like go in there. They do their thing. The mucus keeps them alive. It's like the mucus is serving them drinks and they're chilling out waiting for the egg to drop. And then there's even a type of mucus that kind of like, as you get closer to ovulation, like pushes them out into like, it's a whole thing. It's literally a hotel. So just remember that the next time you see that clear, stretchy stuff, just remember it's trying to pull them into the hotel so that they can wait.
Why do you think there's such a lack of education and basic education, especially with young girls, in understanding their menstrual cycles, cervical fluid, all of these sorts of aspects, especially conceiving, pregnancy plan? Like, why do you feel that we don't have enough education around this?
I mean, I like to think about where this information comes from, like who studied it, who did it, who made it. So a lot of the information that I've learned as a fertility awareness educator, a lot of that research, so there's, he's passed on now, but there was a gentleman from, oh, I'm going to mess this up, but he was from maybe Switzerland. Like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but he was not from he was not from North America. He studied mucus for like 50 years. And a lot of what we know, his name is Dr. Eric Odblad. So a lot of what we know and a lot of what our modern fertility awareness methods are based on. So for example, like the Billings method or the Cretan method, similar to the Justice method, is based on like ultimately his work. So this man studied mucus under a microscope for many years. He identified the different types of mucus that you can actually see under the microscope, named them, classified them, studied them. So when you look at those citations, you're going to see Dr. Eric Odblad, you're going to see like some of the other individuals who kind of learned from his work, because those are the papers, the research papers that they're coming from. And in terms of even the most detailed mucus classification system was developed by Thomas Hilgers, who is the founder of the Cretan method, and he's a Catholic man. And I bring that up because a lot of this information that we have, it's really coming from, like I said, Thomas Hilgers is Catholic. It's kind of coming out of this just small sect of individuals. And as it becomes more mainstream, one of my goals was to share that information, because I really felt like if I hadn't, done my training as a fertility awareness educator in the particular, method that I did, and became privy to the history of fertility awareness and this information about where it came from and the original research, like where our knowledge and foundation of mucus comes from, then I wouldn't know it. So the short answer is that it's just not mainstream. It's just not part of, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I think it obviously was not an area that was well studied in the standard medical paradigm. And a lot of our information and knowledge about the specifics of mucus comes from this one man whose research goes into it really in depth. And of course, that has expanded our understanding. But my understanding is that medical textbooks don't necessarily go into that level of detail about the G mucus and the S mucus and the L mucus and the P mucus and how they work together, and show you the pictures of what they are under the microscope and talk about their role and how they, so there's different types of mucus, and together, basically our cervical mucus, it screens out sperm of poor morphology. So earlier I was talking about how, some of the sperm don't look properly. They might have a mushed head or whatever. And then there's also sperm that don't necessarily have good motility, that don't swim forward or properly or whatever. And so our mucus has the ability to collect essentially the sperm that just doesn't have good motility or morphology. They get caught in our mucus because of these different properties from these different types of mucus that Odblad identified in his research. I don't think that the medical textbooks necessarily go into that depth. I think they could, and maybe in the future they will. I have no idea. But either it's that there was no interest, or they just didn't know, or maybe they just prioritized other aspects of because like medicine is super detailed about so many things. So it is kind of weird to think that they just didn't, this particular issue, they just didn't research, and like it's weird. I don't get it either.
What are your top 3 things that you are seeing women do that are actually detrimental to their cycle?
I'd say intermittent fasting, like skipping meals, just not eating, not getting enough protein, under eating. So like not eating, under eating, exercising too much maybe.
I had a question on that. You see a lot of these gym goer girls that are losing their cycles now. So obviously stress has an impact also on your cycle.
I don't want to be anti-exercise because I've been exercising. I'm just not hardcore. Like I'm not. Like I had my 3rd baby. I had like my tummy sticking out. You know, it was a little, you know, like one. Like I'm in there too. Like I'm a human being as well. So you know, I want to look good, but I'm not hardcore. And part of it too is because I've seen too much. I know too much about the cycle. Like I can't be hardcore. I'm not trying to lose my cycle or get, you know, have PMS symptoms or, you know, lose my luteal phase length. And like, I'm not trying to do that. But ultimately, I don't think there's anything wrong, obviously, with exercise. Exercise is good for us. There's so many health benefits. But as women, I think one of the issues is that we want to follow what the male influencers are doing. Now everyone has their own personal Instagram. Like when I was a kid, there was like the TV, like you would turn it on and there was the news and stuff, and everyone watched the same stuff. Like back in the day, like there was like the shows that were on and everyone watched the same shows. Like I'm so old now. And now everyone has their own curated social media content or whatever. And so you can just find all these people that are telling you to do all these things. And you just, what I would say is, at least as women, we have our menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is the great equalizer because it tells you what is good for you. You could have 2 different women doing the same thing, and one of them have a cycle respond very differently to the other. So, you know, this is what's great about this aspect of the work that I do, because it doesn't come down to what Lisa said, because what I said doesn't matter. What matters is what's happening in your cycle. So, you know, I'm not trying to take away anything you're doing. If you're working out 7 days a week, skipping breakfast, and your cycle is fantastic, then we don't have to have a conversation at all because you're great. But chances are, if you're lifting weights 3 times a week and doing like bar or doing like CrossFit like 5 times and you're skipping breakfast or you're not getting enough protein, chances are your luteal phase is either too short. If it's long enough, you're probably spotting. You probably have some PMS symptoms or whatever. And if that's the case, then we should talk about it. So whether that's that they're trying to get pregnant, whether it's that they have this bleeding that is just happening, you know, pretty regularly or whatever, that seems to be hormone related or whatever it is. And so, yeah, you have to look at that aspect of it as well. And it's not about what you think. It's not about, I know I'm eating healthy. I know this is, I feel best when I skip right. It's not like you have all these thoughts and, you know, that's wonderful. It's about what your cycle is doing. Like, so we can tell ourselves all kinds of stories, but it's about what your cycle is doing. Like if you think, well, I'm better when I don't eat breakfast, I'm not hungry early, and et cetera, and I fasted workouts are best for me or whatever. Well, as long as your cycle is in line, then we don't have to have a conversation. But again, it's not about, unfortunately, what you think or what I think. It's about what is actually happening in your cycle.
Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you would like to mention to the audience?
I would just, to conclude, just to say, you know, like, this isn't about perfection. One of the things with cycle charting, I always say, is that we kind of like it attracts women who tend toward, we're type A. Who is going to take their temperature every day and track it in their app? Who is going to check their mucus all the time? Who's going to do these things, right? We're type A people. Like, we are really interested. We're kind of nerdy, like a little bit, like in a cool way, but still, we're really interested in these topics, really keen to learn about our cycles. It's just a certain type of thing, you know, because people ask me all the time, you know, do you think everyone should chart or whatever? Do you think everybody? And I don't think everyone is going to use this as a method, because everyone's different and not everybody appreciates it. So I do think that cycle charting attracts a certain type of person. And I think we tend toward being type A. And I think we also want everything to be perfect. So when we chart our cycles, we want everything to just be like my period's just perfect. And then I'm ovulating. And of course, you want it to be on day 14 because that would just be perfect. And then we want, everything. So we have to kind of back off from that and recognize that we're human beings, like we're alive. Every cycle is going to be a little bit different. Different things are going to happen in our lives. It's your cycles are going to fluctuate. So if something stressful is going on or anything, you can expect some sort of fluctuation, and that's normal. You have to learn the difference between normal fluctuation and actual problems. And even sometimes one cycle can be super problematic because you had, maybe the ovulation is delayed or whatever because you had something going on that month. But even that doesn't mean that it's a problem as long as it's not a pattern. It just means that your body was reacting to what was going on. So if anything, it's, I'd want you to think about charting within that context. It's not about perfection. The goal is not to have a perfect chart, even though that might seem like the goal. Maybe even that's your goal right now. But I would say that shouldn't necessarily be the goal. With myself, when I'm working with clients, and these days I'm doing a lot of work with women's health practitioners because I've shifted a lot of what I do to support women's health practitioners to support women in this way in their practices. And so my goal is to help women to see their menstrual cycle as that vital sign. And that happens when you chart over a period of time and you start to see how your cycle can fluctuate. You start to learn, oh my goodness, I didn't know that when I skip breakfast every day, it would cause my temperature to be so low. And I didn't know that that would have an effect on my luteal phase. And when I started changing some of those habits, I actually saw how my temperature improved, how my mood and I didn't even expect my energy to improve. My sleep improved. I didn't think that was going to happen. And then I also saw my luteal phase lengthen. So it's more of getting in conversation with your cycle, understanding that you have an impact on it, understanding that your actions matter. And it doesn't mean that you never skip breakfast ever again, because you're probably not like a perfect human being, but it means that you start to see like, oh my gosh, I skipped breakfast twice last week and look what happened. Like you start to, more of the time you start to do what needs to be done. And that's it. It doesn't mean I've had clients, for example, who they've learned about this, but they decide okay, I'm going to run this Ironman thing this year. And so they do their best. They try to mitigate the effects of the training with, their food and everything. But ultimately, if you're training for an Ironman, probably you're going to see some effects in your cycle, right? So I've had clients who for a season, they do these things, but now they're aware. So they see what that season does to their cycle. And then they're able to really have that understanding. And the understanding is so much deeper. And they recognize, okay, this is only for a period of time. And then as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go back to my normal routine. And then their cycles are gradually able to get back to normal. You're dancing with it now. You're not just obliviously doing stuff and having no idea of the negative impact it's having. And then you're able to be in the driver's seat and live your life in an intentional way. And it's not about perfection. It's just about actually being in that driver's seat.
Oh, Lisa, you have been a ton of value. I've actually learned so much from you today. So thank you so much for your time. It sounds like to me that the most important thing as women, especially probably young girls, is to just have body awareness in terms of what works, as you said, what impacts you, and having that awareness with cycle charting and all these different tools in a human way that's going to make you aware of how it's impacting your cycle, and that it can be very individualized. It's not a one size fits all necessarily. So again, thank you for your time. I think a lot of women would have just learnt a ton of information from you today.
Well, you asked such great questions. So thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. So I'm really glad we were able to connect.